In the 5th year of my marriage to George Anderson, our marriage certificate expired. The marriage bureau came to ask whether George and I were willing to renew. If both of us agreed, our marriage would be extended for another 5 years. If either of us refused, the marriage would automatically be voided. George's face was expressionless. Looking utterly indifferent, he told the investigator, "I'm willing to renew." I looked at him. From the day I married him, I don't think I've seen him smile very often. Before the questioning began, I had even overheard him calling Rachel, asking whether she planned to renew with her husband in this marriage census. I didn't know what Rachel said, but after he hung up, George sat on the sofa like a wooden statue all night. And now, today, he chose to renew his marriage with me. He was certain I would never leave him, that I would always be the spare option he could count on. I looked at him and, for some reason, I laughed. Then I lifted my head and said to the person from the marriage bureau, "I'm sorry, I won't be renewing." The moment those words left my mouth, George froze. It seemed it had never once occurred to him that anything other than, "I am willing," could come out of my lips. In his eyes, the mere fact that he had deigned to say, "I'm willing to renew," should already have been enough to make me deeply grateful. His expression turned very ugly. "Angela, what did you just say?" he asked. I looked into his eyes and repeated it again, carefully, word by word, "I'm sorry. I don't wish to renew." George stood there, his pitch-black eyes fixed on me, the corners of his mouth pulled down. His hands, hanging at his sides, had curled into fists. He looked like a man forcing himself to hold his anger in check. Of course, I wasn't foolish enough to think he was angry because he cared about me. He was furious simply because my refusal to renew had cost him face. And perhaps also because something he had always taken for granted as resting securely in the palm of his hand had suddenly done something completely outside his expectations, giving him that stinging sense of being defied. The woman from the marriage bureau had clearly seen this kind of situation countless times. She quickly made a note in her folder. To make sure there was no mistake, she repeated the confirmation before asking me to sign, "Ms. Angela, once you decide not to renew, we will apply for your marriage with Mr. George to be voided. After 1 business day, if you have not changed your mind, the annulment will officially take effect. Are you certain about this?" I imagine my expression was very calm. I nodded and said, "I'm certain." The woman from the marriage bureau nodded and, writing in the register as she spoke, said, "In that case, this coming week will be your cooling-off period with Mr. George. During this time, the two of you should not live together. Would you like us to arrange accommodation for you?" "No, I've already found a place," I said. She made a small sound of acknowledgement and went on, "All right. In a week, our staff will visit again to conduct one last review of both parties' intentions. If you both maintain your current choices, the marriage will be voided immediately. If either of you changes your mind, we can restart the procedure at that time." Then she looked up at me, all business, and asked, "Ms. Angela, would you like any assistance with moving?" Assistance with moving was the polite way of putting it. While the marriage laws were being revised and improved, there had been cases where women who did not wish to renew were beaten when they tried to leave. So later, the marriage bureau began providing protection for all women who chose not to renew. Officially it was called moving assistance, but in reality it was there to ensure a woman's safety during the cooling-off period. Whether to accept that service was entirely up to her. Of course, in some cases it was the man who moved out. This house had been George's personal property before the marriage. After we married, I used my own money to buy a small apartment in the city center, so logically I was the one who should move out. However angry George might be, he would not go so far as to hit me. I shook my head and said, "There's no need, thank you." "Very well." The woman from the marriage bureau closed her folder and, before leaving, said, "The marital cooling-off period will take effect from this moment. You have 12 hours to move out of the residence. If, after 24 hours, our monitoring shows that you and Mr. George have not yet separated, the cooling-off period will be extended by 1 day. If it is extended for more than 3 days, your current application to void the marriage will lapse. Of course, if you encounter any obstruction or difficulty during this period, you can contact us at any time for assistance." I nodded, thanked her, and courteously saw her out. When I closed the door and turned around, George was still standing where he had been, frozen in the middle of the living room like an ice sculpture, a chill radiating off him as he stared into nothing. At the sound of the door closing, he suddenly lifted his head and shot me a look. That look was bone-deep winter. His eyes were black as ink, unreadable. He gave a short, cold laugh and asked, "Angela, what is that supposed to mean?" I looked at him. "I'm sorry, George. I didn't talk to you in advance, but I really don't want to renew this marriage." His chest rose and fell rapidly. He was clearly furious, yet still forcing himself to keep his temper in check. Looking down at me from on high, he glared and let out another cold laugh. "Who do you think you are? So you won't renew, fine. You think I care?" Then he gave another mocking snort. During these 7 days of cooling off, I just hope you won't end up regretting it and running back to beg me not to break up. George had his reasons for saying that. Earlier in our relationship, we'd gone through one big breakup, instigated by me. And of course, I had also been the one to go back later and ask him to get back together. So when he said that today, dripping with sarcasm as he reminded me not to repeat the past, I simply smiled and held my tongue. Seeing my reaction, his expression darkened another shade. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something more, then he swallowed it back down. Clearly, my decision not to renew had dealt a heavy blow to young Master Anderson's pride. He had always regarded me with a certain careless indifference, yet now his face looked as though he wanted to come over and tear me apart, as if I had done something terribly, unforgivably wrong to him. To be fair, I hadn't handled this very honorably either. I hadn't told him in advance. In fact, I had only firmed up my decision not to renew quite recently. A month before this round of marriage renewal checks, I was still nervously, cautiously asking George whether he wanted to renew. At the time he was full of self-satisfaction, giving me a sidelong glance as he drawled, "What, you're worried I won't renew?" Then he laughed. "In that case, you'd better be on your best behavior this month. Next month I might consider it." I had always treated George very well. It was my nature to look after people, and it had a lot to do with my childhood. My adoptive parents were deaf-mute, so from a very young age, whether consciously or not, I had grown used to taking meticulous care of the people around me. For the past 5 years, that was exactly how I had treated George. Once, George said to me, "Angela, you're really suited for marriage." Suited for marriage was hardly a compliment, but at the time I kept persuading myself it was just a thoughtless slip of the tongue. I thought I would always be able to shrug it off. Until not long ago. George probably never imagined that I was at home that day, hearing the call he made to Rachel. I had a fever and was half conscious in bed. I dragged myself up to go to the living room for some water and saw him sitting on the sofa, phone pressed to his ear. He hadn't turned on the lights. His lashes were lowered, he looked both despondent and full of hope, yet his tone on the phone was deliberately casual as he asked, "Rachel, in this marriage census, will you be renewing with your husband?" I don't know what was said on the other end. I only saw the smile at the corner of his lips suddenly stiffen. Yet as if the woman on the line were right in front of him, that carefully manufactured curve never quite faded. Even after he hung up, that ridiculous little smile still clung to his mouth. He sat there on the sofa, clutching the disconnected phone, and stayed like that the whole night. He never even realized I was at home. I didn't go out to him either. I stood in the shadow of the hallway and watched him be heartbroken for an entire night. When I was with George, I had no idea there was already someone in his heart. Back then he had been the one chasing me, sincere and enthusiastic. He was handsome and well-born, and I was just an ordinary, shallow woman. I warned myself countless times not to fall for him, but as the saying goes, if feelings could be controlled, they wouldn't be called feelings. I fell for him anyway. After we got together, his attitude gradually cooled, but at the time I thought all couples were like that. He would show me off all over his social media, use childish matching profile pictures with me, buy me piles of presents for every holiday, and take photos of me so he could flaunt his affection on every special occasion. Even though every time after posting he would seem absent-minded, staring at his phone over and over, I never sensed that anything was wrong. The truth came out in our 3rd year together, when I overheard one of his friends ask him, "Did you hear? It sounds like Rachel is getting married." That was when I realized there had always been a well-matched childhood sweetheart in his heart. She was cool and distant, emotionally detached, focused only on her studies. She had left George behind when she went abroad for college and later ended up with a like-minded senior from her lab. I heard his friend go on, "Rachel's getting married, and you just went and proposed. Marriage isn't a game. Don't you think you should think it over again?" George's expression at the time was rather dejected. He let out a self-mocking little laugh and said, "What difference does it make who I marry? It's not like I like any of them anyway." The next day, I broke up with George. He didn't ask why. He just gave an indifferent little shrug and said, "All right, if that's what you want." I only found out later that when Rachel had broken up with him and told him she was going abroad to pursue her dreams, George had tried every possible way to win her back. Even now, his close buddies still tease him about it sometimes. The haughty, never-bends young Master Anderson had humbled himself down to the bone. He was willing to do a long-distance relationship, willing to fly to the United States every week, even ready to give up his studies at home and follow Rachel overseas, just so she wouldn't leave him. Unfortunately, before his family could even properly object, Rachel had already spoken first, cold and impatient. "Are you done making a scene? I'm going abroad to focus on my own research. You can't even get into a good school right now. In the end, are you really going to be accompanying me, or will I just be wasting my time accompanying you? George, I don't have time to play house with you. Can you please grow up a little and stop being so childish? Back then, George was still the kind of young man who would throw his whole heart into love without hesitation. Ignoring everyone else's opinions, he went ahead with the paperwork and went abroad with Rachel. But in less than a year, he came back. I also only learned later that, aside from the physical discomfort of living abroad and the growing mental distance between him and Rachel, Rachel had developed a real fondness for a senior in her lab. George came home covered in invisible wounds. Still, as a wealthy young master, his cost of trial and error was almost zero. No matter what choices he made, life would always offer him countless chances to start over. He enrolled in a top university back home and became my classmate. At the time, I had no idea why George wanted to pursue me. Later I learned that it was because Rachel had gotten together with that senior. He had sunk into self-destruct mode and needed a girlfriend, by his side, someone to compete on his behalf and to help him lick his wounds. I was the most suitable person for him at that moment. Pretty, good grades, good temper, and someone who could easily help him regain some pride on social media. Most importantly, my family background wasn't that great, which, in his mind, meant a girl with a stronger sense of pride. If he ever wanted to dump me in the future, I probably wouldn't cling to him. After I learned the truth, I broke up with him. George hadn't been wrong, girls like me really do have a strong sense of pride. If he ever wanted to get rid of me, I absolutely wouldn't cling to him. But plans never catch up with reality. Later, something happened to my family. When my adoptive parents were in critical condition after a car accident, it was George who helped me handle everything. By then, some time had already passed since our breakup. My first job after graduation had me run completely ragged, working overtime all night was practically routine. So when I received the call about the accident at home, the shock on top of chronic exhaustion and low blood sugar hit me at once, and I fainted. My colleague took me to the hospital and then called George. Because I had forgotten to change the way his name was saved in my contacts. George came too. This is one thing about him, no matter how embarrassing our breakup had been, he could still maintain that gentlemanly poise. Once he heard that his ex-girlfriend was in trouble, he could come rushing straight to the hospital. Later, he was the one who accompanied me back to my hometown, stayed by my side as I went to court against the driver who hit them. At that time, my adoptive parents were in the ICU, and the massive daily expenses were all fronted by him. In the end, my adoptive parents didn't make it. He stayed with me and helped me arrange the funeral as well. Thoughtful to the smallest detail, attentive in every way, that is the brand of grace young men from families like his are raised with. Back then I looked at him and thought to myself, so it's him. So it's him. Apart from not loving me, he really doesn't seem to have any flaws. And once I entered the working world, I have to admit that my own views on things had changed a great deal. The old me was very black and white. If I liked someone, I liked them, if I didn't, I didn't. I had no room in my heart for gray areas. But after breaking up with George, I tried dating other men. Most of them were weighing pros and cons, my family background, what it would mean to have deaf-mute adoptive parents-in-law. Most men who approached me were really only looking for a short-term fling with my looks. The so-called promising young men my boss introduced me to were nothing more than a way to cash in a small favor at my expense. Is being in love really that important? For someone like me, whose adoptive parents had just passed away and who was crushed under extreme work pressure, it didn't seem all that important anymore. So I asked George, can we get back together? George was taken aback for a moment, and then we reconciled. Half a year after Rachel got married, we got married too. And we stayed married all the way to today. George left. From the moment I chose not to renew, he had been standing in the middle of the living room, chest heaving as if he had nowhere to vent the anger boiling inside him. He couldn't help kicking the sofa, then shot me another icy look before walking out. Just before he left, he gave a cold little laugh and said to me, since you're not renewing, then pack up all your things. When I come back, I don't want to see any trace of you in this house. George hadn't realized that over these past few days, I had already been moving my things to my little apartment bit by bit. What was left were really just some insignificant odds and ends. After George left, I began to wander slowly through the apartment, erasing my presence little by little. The pots of greenery on the balcony, the wooden sculpture in the living room, the acupuncture machine I'd bought for George, the cushions on the sofa, the little teddy bear ornament in the bedroom, the computer and charger in the study, the towels and plastic slippers in the bathroom. When we were living together, I had never really noticed them. But now, looking carefully, it seemed the ties between us had grown much deeper than I'd imagined without my realizing it. After all, we had been married and living together for 5 years. All these small, scattered objects were the best proof of our 5 years of intimacy. I put them all into a large bag and took it down to the residential garbage station. Once everything was dealt with, I stood in the entryway with my suitcase. I turned to look one last time at the spotless, immaculate home and shook my head with a small smile. No matter what, I am grateful to George for accompanying me through these 5 years. My best friend Mary was waiting for me downstairs. When I hauled my suitcase into the car, she let out a sigh and said, "I honestly thought you were just going to keep putting up with it. You've endured it for 5 years already, how come you suddenly can't take it anymore?" How did I suddenly stop being able to take it? I don't know. It just felt like one day, all at once, I was tired. When I married George, I knew he didn't love me, but I always believed that time could conquer everything. And even though I like to say that, apart from not loving me, he was simply my best option back then, the way he helped me with everything involving my adoptive parents, running around on my behalf, made me truly believe that sincerity could eventually wear down stone. I thought that one day, we'd grow used to each other's presence, and he would come to like me. I don't know how a man can be so heartless and yet so steadfast at the same time. Heartless toward me, steadfast toward Rachel. Of course, in all the years George and I were married, Rachel never contacted him. That dramatic, white moonlight crashes the marriage storyline you see in novels never happened with her. So I've always been very clear that I'm not the heroine of some repentant husband chases his wife to the ends of the earth story, and George is not that kind of male lead. He just, truly, simply does not like me. No matter how much I give in this marriage, no matter how meticulously I take care of him, if he doesn't like me, then he doesn't like me. I don't even know what was going through my mind, but for a long stretch of time, I couldn't help secretly checking Rachel's social media. She rarely posted anything, maybe 2 or 3 updates a year, and they were always photos of her research or of family celebrations. She looked to be in great shape. In every picture she wore a confident, open smile, carrying that calm composure unique to highly intelligent people. She looked very happy. In those few sparse posts of hers, every single time she updated, George's like would appear underneath. It was as if, just as I was quietly keeping an eye on her account, he too was keeping vigil over Rachel's updates. Once, on George's birthday, I had carefully prepared a surprise party for him. After the celebration, he got drunk, and when we came home, he sat down on the sofa right in front of me and called Rachel. I heard the calm female voice on the other end listen quietly as George poured out his feelings and longing. Then she said, "Happy birthday," paused for a moment, and added, "George, stop calling me. You need to learn to cherish the person in front of you." After that, George, still drunk, curled up on the sofa hugging his phone, even though the call had already ended. I stood a few steps away in the living room, watching the scene. I honestly don't know what I was thinking at the time. I envied Rachel. She was calm, knowledgeable, goal-oriented, and knew exactly what she wanted. If I were a man, I might have liked her too. Unfortunately, I am Angela. I was born ordinary. The only thing in my life that could be called dramatic enough for a main character was being abandoned at birth. Fortunately, I was adopted by a kind deaf-mute couple. We were poor, but they loved me very much. I never had any grand ambitions. I never dreamed of devoting my whole life to some research that might never bear fruit but would benefit humanity. All I ever wanted was to live an ordinary life, find a decent job, earn a good salary so my adoptive parents could live comfortably, marry a good man, have a child, and grow old in quiet, unremarkable peace. When did I feel I couldn't endure it anymore? When did I start thinking, forget it? Maybe it was that night when George called Rachel to ask whether she and her husband were going to renew. I stood in the corner of the wall, watching George sit on the sofa, miserable, and all of a sudden, a tiny incident from long, long ago surfaced in my mind. It must have been not long after George and I got married. His family had just bought him the big house we live in now. George was very busy, so nearly all of the renovation and moving was handled solely by me. Because I was also working overtime a lot back then, I'd already been thinking about changing jobs. There were quite a few headhunters in the industry reaching out to me, so in the end I simply resigned from my previous position, planning to finish dealing with the house first and then look for work again. I was the one who found the construction team, who sparred with the foreman, who went alone to all the furniture markets, picking out every piece for the house one by one, comparing them over and over, working through all the details with the designer. I didn't even feel that tired at the time. All I could think was that I was finally going to have a home of my own. God knows how much I had longed for a home of my own, from childhood all the way up to that moment. From the renovation to the final move, almost everything was done by me alone. On the very last day of moving, George was there. He carried a few cardboard boxes into the room with great care. Later, while I was helping put things away, I accidentally broke a pair of ceramic cups. That was the first time I ever saw George lose his temper. I had actually fallen off a propped-up chair myself, and my left arm was twisted at a strange angle, probably broken. But under the dazzling crystal chandelier, the look on George's face as he stared at the shattered pieces of those cups almost made me forget the pain. His eyes were bloodshot as he glared at me. He practically yelled in a fury, "What is wrong with you? I made these with Rachel by hand in Teoxyquin when we were 16, and you just destroy them like that. Are you crazy? Stop messing with my things. My face went pale with panic. Lying on the floor, all I managed to do was reflexively apologize. He stared at me, seething. Later, I thought that if I hadn't been a woman, given how heartbroken and furious he was, he probably would have wanted to punch me. He glared at me for a long time, holding his anger in, then finally crouched down to carefully, tenderly gather up the broken pieces. After he left, I was still lying on the floor. It was only then that the pain from my broken arm really reached my brain. I was drenched in sweat from the agony. It felt like my leg had been badly bruised too. I struggled to call a car. After I got back from the hospital, for the sake of those 2 cups, I remember spending months apologizing to George, humbling myself over and over. After that, he packed all of his personal belongings into the study and had a password lock installed on the door, one whose code I didn't know. The day it was installed, he looked at me coldly and said, "From now on, don't touch my things without permission." Later, it felt as if I had forgotten this whole incident, as if I'd been so hurt at the time that my brain had activated some kind of defense mechanism and deliberately buried the memory. I don't know why it suddenly resurfaced. I remembered how I'd felt back when George said those words to me. It was as if something in my chest had gone hollow in an instant. I knew that no matter how many years passed, I would never be able to fill that emptiness. I was standing in the corner, watching George call Rachel, when this scene suddenly came back to me. My eyes drifted to the password lock on the study door. Everything I'd suppressed over 5 years of marriage, the weariness, the humiliation, crashed over me in waves like the tide, and I suddenly felt exhausted. This had never been my home. Because whether it was George or this house, there was always a corner I could never reach. Rather than a place of belonging, I was more like a parasite here, destined to leave one day. It was at that moment that I changed my mind and decided not to renew my marriage with George. But now, facing Mary's worried gaze, there was no way to explain any of this. After all, over drinks before, we'd compared our situations, and compared to George, her boyfriend was hardly any better. She had once told me, with genuine envy, "Angela, when you get to my age, you'll understand that all that love or not to crap is just nonsense. George is handsome, rich, and good-looking. Even if he has a white moonlight in his heart, he's not out there fooling around. Believe me, someone like him already beats 99.9% of men. Life is something you just muddle through anyway." Mary's love life was a complete disaster. The same ex had toyed with her over and over again. That advice of hers came straight from the bottom of her heart. So I thought about it for a long time before I finally said, "I met someone." George knew about this too. A year ago, and in turn joined our company. He was the son of one of our major shareholders. I was his mentor for a while. He'd been chasing me for a year like an eager little puppy, though he'd never crossed any lines. He was just young and straightforward, bad at hiding his feelings. He thought he was being discreet, but his enthusiasm made his every gesture toward me painfully obvious. I kept clear boundaries with him. Even so, to this day he still messages me every day, still buys me gifts, whether I respond or accept them or not, he keeps at it, day after day, never changing. But because he has never spelled it out, I haven't been able to outright reject him. Once, in order to make him back off, I begged George for a long time to attend a company dinner with me. After the dinner, as we were heading to the parking garage, George laughed and asked, "That young guy sitting across from you, does he like you?" The way he was looking at me, I half expected him to skewer me on a stick and roast me. At the time, I thought he'd be upset. I even secretly wondered if he might be jealous. I hurried to explain, but as soon as I finished, he just laughed and said breezily, "So what? Isn't it a good thing that someone likes you? Next time, don't drag me out as a human shield for this kind of thing. It's a waste of my time." I remember looking at him then and feeling as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over my head from above, chilling me to the bone. Only when you don't care, only when you don't love someone, can you be that casual. Before I decided not to renew my marriage with George, I received a text from Charles Wilson. On his end, he cautiously asked, "Angela, have you and your husband been married for 5 years now? Are you going to renew?" I didn't reply. But on the day I decided not to renew with George, I finally answered his message. I wrote, "We're not renewing." On the other side, he kept typing and deleting, and typing again. After more than 10 minutes, he suddenly called me, and I answered. The voice of a young man came through, stammering, incoherent, circling around the same points. "I'm so happy. The moment I saw your husband last time, I thought he wasn't good enough for you. No, I'm not gloating. I just feel sad for you, really. But you deserve someone better. I'm sorry. You must be feeling awful right now. I shouldn't be bothering you. Sorry, I don't even know what I'm saying. Do you want me to come and keep you company?" I listened quietly to his voice on the other end. A year ago, when he'd first joined the company, he could verbally spar with a passive-aggressive client for half an hour without backing down. Now he was tripping all over his own tongue. For some reason, I actually felt a little better. I cut into his rambling and said, "Things have been really busy lately. I'm pretty tied up too." His voice fell, and even through the phone, I could almost see his lashes drooping in disappointment. After a pause, I added, "But if you want to cheer me up, when things calm down, you can treat me to a big meal." He instantly sprang back to life on the spot, excitedly stammering out several agreements in a row. Only when you care, only when you like someone, do you become this cautious and at a loss for what to do. This was a feeling I had never experienced with George. When I hung up, there was still a faint upward curve at the corner of my lips. I suddenly wanted to give it a try, maybe out of obsession, maybe out of curiosity. I wanted to experience the kind of steadfast, focused devotion George gave to Rachel, the thing he had never given me. I had always wondered what kind of obsession could make a man keep loving someone who had long since left, year after year, without wavering. He loved someone else like that, and now there was someone who loved me in the same way. I wanted to know what it felt like to be loved that passionately and single-mindedly. So I let go of George. I decided I wanted to try a new choice. Charles's feelings really were passionate and focused. When Mary parked the car downstairs at my apartment building and I opened the car door, I saw Charles. He was crouched on a round marble block by the entrance. The moment he saw the car pull up, his eyes lit up and he walked toward us. Mary had just opened the trunk when he had already lifted my suitcase out. After we said hello, I asked him, "What are you doing here?" He smiled, showing 8 perfectly aligned teeth, his grin bright. "I figured you might need some help moving today. Just in case you had anything heavy, I could give you a hand." I frowned slightly. I don't really like people making decisions for me, but he meant well, and I relaxed my expression quickly. Even so, that fleeting emotion still didn't escape his notice. He handed me the suitcase and smiled again. "But it looks like you don't have anything heavy after all. You've got friends helping you today, and there must be a lot to do, so I'll head out first. If you need anything, you can call me." He paused, then added by way of explanation, "I sent you a WeChat message before I came. You were probably busy and didn't see it. I was just worried you might need help, so I thought I'd come check." The slight annoyance I had felt a moment before instantly turned into a twinge of guilt. He, however, acted as if nothing was wrong. He waved his phone at me playfully and said, "I'm open 24 hours. You can come to me for anything. Once you're settled in, I'll treat you to a meal." On the way upstairs, Mary bumped my shoulder and said, "That younger guy seems pretty nice." I just smiled and said nothing. Later, Mary stayed to help me unpack. By the time we finally finished, it was almost 1 in the morning. After washing up, we changed into our pajamas and collapsed onto the sofa, our heads leaned together. She asked, "So what's your plan now? How do you really feel about that kid? You're not planning to use him as a rebound, are you?" My tone was fairly relaxed. I shrugged. "I haven't thought that far. I just want to get to know him first." Mary let out a muffled chuckle. After a while, her tone turned a little wistful. "Sure enough, the ones who are loved always have the most confidence." I froze for a second. Mary was right. The ones who are favored always take it for granted, just like Rachel with George, George with me, and me with Charles. Thinking of that afternoon, of him crouching downstairs in front of my apartment building, I suddenly felt a little guilty. If anyone should understand the feeling of having genuine affection ignored and squandered, it's me. So, after a moment's thought, I picked up my phone and sent Charles a message, "Sorry about earlier this afternoon." He quickly replied with a smiling emoji, "It's okay, you're always really busy. I just showed up and made trouble for you. I actually really hate people who don't know what boundaries are." After that, as if afraid I might still be stuck in guilt, he changed the subject and sent me a spreadsheet. On it were the restaurants he'd picked out, along with the distance from each place to my home and my office, the flavor profile, cuisine type, signature dishes, and some of his own notes. He said, "I don't know what you feel like eating, so I picked different restaurants across different cuisines and tastes. You can choose directly. If there are any you can't decide on, just tick them, and we can try them one by one. Start by picking the one you want to go to the most." I scrolled up and looked at the spreadsheet. He'd done it in great detail: Japanese cuisine, French restaurants, more niche places like Nepalese and Spanish, all 8 major regional Chinese cuisines were there as well, with a heavier emphasis on Sichuan. He probably knew I liked spicy food. And it hadn't been that long since I'd joked about him taking me out for a big meal. He had probably started putting the sheet together right after I said that to him last night. As I flicked through the spreadsheet, my mood suddenly turned a little strange, because I thought of the way things had been between George and me. All these years, when it came to putting in this much effort over just one offhand remark, I had always been the one doing it for other people. This was the first time someone had gone to so much trouble just to please me, to win my favor. It's not that no one had ever liked me. Even after I married George, plenty of people had hinted at their interest in me. But those pursuits all had something very obvious they wanted in return. The moment you cooled down even a little, they'd immediately understand your rejection and retreat tactfully to a safe distance. After all, no one wants to waste their time. In the fast food-style relationships of modern times, everyone is afraid of losing out. You have to measure out your feelings in careful doses. The energy, time, and money you invest all have to stay within a controllable range. If you don't receive a response within that range, you cut your losses at once and move on to the next person on the same tempo. Charles was different. He made me feel, how should I put it, as if I were suddenly enlightened. So this is what it feels like to be liked openly and fervently by someone the way I once liked others. He didn't mind being treated coolly. He didn't mind if the energy, time, and money he put in might go to waste. He just simply, purely wanted to offer you the best of everything. Just like I used to, when I was young. To be honest, when I decided to leave George, even though I did it neatly and decisively, deep down there was still confusion and grievance. I couldn't understand why. For the 3 years we'd been together, and the 5 years we'd been married, I had poured so much effort into maintaining this relationship and this marriage. I wasn't the sort of person who clung desperately to someone against their will. George clearly enjoyed everything I gave in our relationship and marriage. My efforts were not a burden to him, nor something he found tiresome. He had chosen me back then, chosen to be with me. So why, after I'd warmed this stone for 5 whole years, had I not managed to warm him even a little? For a very long time, I suspected myself. I wondered if the way I treated him was wrong, if the love and care I gave him just weren't good enough, and that was why, after all these years, he still couldn't let go of Rachel, and I hadn't moved him in the slightest. But after being treated like this by Charles, I realized that wasn't it. Being liked, cared for, and constantly thought of in a measured, respectful, considerate, meticulous, and focused way by someone you don't dislike, it wasn't a bad feeling at all. The fact that I couldn't move George wasn't my fault. That knot that had been tangled deep inside me for so many years, the thing I could never quite figure out, suddenly loosened. Along with it, that last little bit of unwillingness I'd held toward George also seemed to fall away all at once. So there really are people who, in a single instant, can let another person go. I looked at Charles. If before I had only wanted to experience for myself what it felt like to be loved this way, now I didn't want to let that sincerity end in disappointment. At the very least, in whatever comes next between Charles and me, I will treat it seriously, on a foundation of genuine intention. I must have taken too long to reply, because after a while Charles sent another message. Did you not like any of them? It's okay if you didn't. I can keep looking for other good places. I sent back a smiley face and replied, no, they're all great. I like all of them. He seemed relieved, because he answered quickly, that's good. Once you've sorted everything out, tell me when you're free, and I'll make the arrangements. I said all right, then paused and added, after I'm done with the paperwork. That was my way of showing respect to both George and him. He must have understood what I meant, because a long time later, he replied, I can wait. My heart suddenly felt steady. It was as if there were an invisible force that gave me endless courage in the face of an unknown future. Just like a line I once read, to be loved is the greatest capital in this world, with it, you don't fear walking in empty-handed. Once my heart settled, I stopped overthinking. I worked as usual and slept soundly. Until the 5th night after I moved into my new apartment, when I got a call from George. It was a little past 2 in the morning. His voice on the phone was cold as he said, you still have things you haven't taken. The call dragged me out of sleep. My head was still foggy, and I reflexively asked, what? George's voice, on the other hand, was perfectly clear, as if this hour were not a time for sleeping. He lowered his voice and repeated impatiently, you still have things you haven't taken. That woke me up a bit. I turned on the bedside lamp, leaned halfway against the headboard, and asked, what things? His voice was taut, and just from the sound I could picture that expressionless, impatient face of his. His tone was dripping with sarcasm as he said, everything in here is your stuff. I told you 5 days ago to clear out all your things. Are you doing this on purpose? George gave a cold laugh on the other end. You didn't deliberately leave something behind as an excuse to give yourself a way back, did you? I didn't quite follow. What? I asked, puzzled. He kept laughing coldly. Do you think you've suffered a lot these past 5 years, Angela? So now you're playing hard to get, using this whole not renewing thing as leverage to manipulate me. You think that's going to scare me? He gave a derisive snort and went on, you picked the wrong tactic, Angela. I'm not buying it. You don't want to renew? Fine. Who do you think you are? You think I care? Either you haul yourself back here and cancel your application not to renew, or you stay gone forever and never come back. In the middle of the night, people's brains really are a bit slow. It took me a moment to piece together what he meant. He actually thought that my decision 5 days ago not to renew had been some kind of ploy to threaten and control him. From his perspective, it was understandable, I suppose. Just a month earlier, I had still been nervously asking whether he intended to renew. Sometimes when you're completely speechless, all you can do is laugh. I tugged at the corner of my mouth and cut him off. "Throw it away," I said. There was a brief silence on his end. I thought he hadn't heard me properly, so I repeated, "Throw it away. Whatever you find later on, just throw it out. You don't need to call me." It was a long time before he finally answered stiffly, "If anything's going to be thrown out, you can do it yourself. Otherwise you'll just use it as an excuse to come back and bother me later." That was, admittedly, a reasonable concern. I sighed and asked him, "Then when are you free tomorrow? Let's find a time to do a single handover and get it all over with." His voice was icy. "I'll be here until 5 in the evening." He seemed deliberate as he emphasized, "After 5, I've got dinner plans. If you still want your things, come get them early. If you're late, I'll just throw them out." I hummed an acknowledgement. He paused, waited a little longer, then finally hung up. The next day, I was pretty punctual. I went over at 1 in the afternoon, not so early that I'd disturb his rest, and not so late that I'd interfere with his date. When he opened the door for me, his expression was frigid. Leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, he looked at me with a mocking smile. "What's wrong? It's only been 6 days and you've already forgotten the code to your own front door." I gave him a quick once-over. My first impression was mild surprise, because he looked nothing like the cheerful image he'd been projecting in his moments. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his face looked tired. Maybe he'd just been having too much fun celebrating with his friends these past few days. I didn't say much. Keeping my face unchanged, I simply suggested, "You might want to change the password. That way, if anything ever happens in the future, you won't come looking for me to take the blame." Then I paused and asked, "So what did I forget here?" He turned and walked back into the apartment. "Find it yourself. You don't actually expect me to have packed it all up for you, do you?" I had no choice. I took off my shoes and went in barefoot. After all, my slippers weren't here anymore. I searched the bedroom, the bathroom, the living room, the dining area, but couldn't find anything that belonged to me. With no other option, I stood in the living room and asked George, who was sitting off to the side, "I can't find it, George. What is it?" He lowered his head, looking a little dazed, his gaze fixed on the floor. I followed his line of sight, and realized he was looking at my feet. Sensing my gaze, he suddenly withdrew his eyes, said nothing, stood up in silence, and went into the bedroom to bring out a teddy bear. I fell silent as well. This bear was something George had bought. Not long after we got married, I would often, in my sleep, cling to him like a koala. Before falling asleep I tried to keep some distance, but when I woke up, maybe because the air conditioning at home was set too low, I would somehow end up curled in his arms. George had pushed me awake many times, but I couldn't break the habit. Later he bought this bear for me and placed it in the middle of the bed. After that, even in my sleep, I would just cling to the bear, and gradually I got rid of that bad habit. I stared for a moment, then reached out to take the bear. George didn't let go. I tugged again, and with his head lowered he suddenly asked, "Are you angry that I didn't treat you properly before?" I lifted my head to look at him. He still wouldn't look at me, just kept his head bowed, clutching the bear. His tone was completely different from the cold, hard voice on the phone last night. He sounded tired, drained. He even sighed and said, "Don't make trouble anymore, Angela. I admit it. I admit I didn't treat you well before. I'm tired. I don't have the energy, and I don't want to change anything. I'm giving in. Come back. Whatever you want, I'll agree, as long as we can go back to how we were." I didn't know why, but I suddenly felt like laughing. He was using this bear as a pretext to coax me back, and now, in his weariness, he was offering this so-called concession simply because he didn't want his current way of life disrupted. For someone like George, who had always stood above me, this was the first time he'd lowered himself and softened his stance, and it was only because he didn't want his rhythm disturbed. The house that was always in perfect order, the never-ending rotation of 5 dishes and 1 soup precisely to his taste, the bed that was always clean and warm, the soft-spoken care, the shirts in the wardrobe always pressed without a single wrinkle, the ties laid out to match each suit, and even a wife who, in everyone else's eyes, was capable, well-educated, and pretty. This was the stability he wanted. He seemed never to realize what kind of effort of mine lay behind that stability. He wanted stability, nothing that went off the rails. His reason for trying to win me back wasn't even that he thought he loved me or couldn't live without me. How could I not laugh, when after all these years, the first time he recognized my role, my efforts, and his own reluctance to lose me came in a scene like this. I did laugh, and my voice was genuinely weary. I sighed, just as he had, and said, "George, we can't go back. The stability you want, I don't want it anymore." I let go of the bear he'd been holding onto and met his eyes. He stared at me blankly. It felt like the first time in years that he was truly looking straight at me, as if trying to see my soul through my gaze. I looked back just as openly, trying to make him believe I wasn't lying. "There's no scheme, no threat, no playing hard to get, George. I just really, simply don't want to be with you anymore. I won't come back using this kind of excuse again, George. When they come for the follow-up survey tomorrow, I still won't agree to renew." His face slowly drained of color. For the first time, he looked at me as if the ground had dropped away from under him. The bear slipped from his hands and fell to the floor. I gave him a small smile and even left him with one last, gentle line. "Take care of yourself from now on. If possible, there's no need for us to see each other again." One day later, the Marriage Bureau came, as usual, to conduct their post-cooling-off follow-up. When they asked for George's decision, he gave me a long, deep look and then said, "I'm still willing to renew." My expression was calm as I looked at the investigator, and my tone was steady. "I'm still not willing to renew." In the first week after the 5th anniversary of my marriage to George, we successfully got divorced. Charles and I went out for that meal. He seemed nervous, but kept watching me attentively, offering napkins, refilling my water, never letting the atmosphere go cold, all the while worrying that the restaurant he'd chosen wouldn't suit my taste. I finally couldn't help laughing and reassured him, "I like it a lot. Don't be so nervous." He found himself a little ridiculous too and let out a laugh, finally relaxing back into his chair. "I'm just afraid I'll mess up the very first meal I treat you to and you'll put me on your blacklist." I laughed. "I won't. I'm giving you 90 points. He looked a little puzzled and leaned forward, the picture of a diligent student. "Where are the other 10 points? Smiling, I looked into his eyes. "The remaining 10 are your room for improvement." He caught on, the corners of his brows lifting, a bright, unrestrained smile spreading from his lips to his eyes. "Then I'll make sure I earn that full score as soon as possible," he said. Charles and I didn't officially become a couple until 7 months later. He gave me a wonderful experience, or rather, a profound sense of safety and being loved. During that doomed marriage with George, the most important thing I learned was to love myself. I hadn't planned on entering a new relationship so quickly. I felt there was still a lot I needed to learn. Charles said we could learn together. With him, there was always a response to anything I brought up. Every casual remark was something he tucked away in his heart. Without me having to do anything, he started learning to cook the dishes I liked, cleaning the apartment with me, changing the bedding with me, ironing clothes with me. Apart from our respective jobs, we hardly did anything separately. And after I got together with him, Mary complained that I seemed to be getting lazier, more clueless about household chores and groceries, and a bit chubbier than before, but somehow also more and more beautiful. She chuckled and, from the heart, said she was happy for me. "But you, like this now, are really doing great." Sometimes I didn't quite understand, and I asked Charles, "What exactly do you like about me?" I thought he'd say something grand and vague, like how there's no reason needed to like someone. Instead, as he washed the dishes, he replied matter-of-factly, "What's so strange about liking you? You're that good-looking, you're that capable at work, and you're that gentle in temperament. Wouldn't it be strange not to like you? There is no such thing as affection without a reason." He liked me because of my strengths. The confidence that had been worn away over 8 years with George, the qualities I'd never noticed in myself, he named them for me with absolute certainty. "You're just really, really great. That's why I like you so much." I wrapped my arms around his waist from behind. His hands were covered in dish soap, but he still turned and pressed a light kiss to my forehead. He had always been able to catch every emotion I threw his way. Oh, right, after I got together with Charles, I ran into George again. It was on an ordinary evening after work, just before Mid-Autumn Festival. He was waiting at the door of my apartment building, bringing me mooncakes his family had made, my favorite flavor. After my adoptive parents died, I rarely had the chance to spend those family gathering holidays with anyone. I had always treated his family as my own, but unfortunately, they had always been rather cold to me, so later I would ask to work overtime on such holidays to avoid seeing them. George was standing at the entrance. When he saw me, he straightened up for a moment, then tried to look nonchalant as he handed me the box of mooncakes. "My mom asked me to give these to you." He hesitated, then asked, "Tomorrow's Mid-Autumn. Do you have anywhere to go?" I looked at him and gave a polite, distant smile. "Thank you. I've already got plans." Charles's parents had invited me to spend the holiday with them. During the new year, they even gave me red envelopes. Like family. George froze for an instant, as if he hadn't expected that answer. After a moment he uttered a quiet then an oh, and stood there looking at me, as though waiting for me to say more. I unlocked the door and took the box of mooncakes, saying politely, "I'll accept these, but please don't bring any more in the future. I'm not inviting you in for tea either, I'm afraid my boyfriend might get the wrong idea." He gave a strained little smile. "You've already found a boyfriend?" I hummed an affirmation. Then he left. The second time he came by, he saw me out walking the dog with Charles. I saw him too. From not far away, he kept looking in our direction, but, to his credit, he didn't come over. With George's conditions, he was never going to be short on girlfriends. In the very first month after our divorce, his family had already started arranging blind dates with well-matched women. But when both people come from privileged backgrounds and neither knows how to compromise or give, keeping a family together can be difficult. But none of that is anything I need to worry about. Because George started liking every single one of my posts on social media, and on the day I made our relationship public, he changed his profile picture to black and posted, "Sometimes you get too used to something, and it's only when you lose it completely that you feel the dull, belated ache." Out of curiosity, I checked the likes under Rachel's most recent posts. I didn't see George's profile picture there. He hadn't appeared under Rachel's updates in a long time. Charles got a little anxious and asked me, "What's he trying to say with that?" I turned and kissed him on the eye, not bothering to interpret whatever George meant. Life is like this, you keep saying goodbye to people from your past, and you keep meeting new ones. George doesn't know how to say goodbye to the past, which means he'll always be losing things. I'm not him. I will say goodbye to my past bravely and cherish the people by my side who are worth cherishing. And I'll never let them slip through my fingers again.